welcome. I'm Rogers Anderson, and as we travel around Williamson County, I have the distinct honor and the pleasure this today of speaking and having a dialogue and a conversation with no one really needs to. I certainly don't need to introduce her. Everyone will know her, Judge Jane Franks. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Rogers, for inviting me, and I don't really know what I have to add to all of the great topics that you've had and the things that you've discussed, but I like your program, and I appreciate being able to be a part of it this morning.
Well, thank you, and I think at the end of our show, people might take a little different opinion of that. I think you have a lot to offer here in Williamson County. Let's talk a little bit about where you came from and your early life, and then we want to spend the majority of our time in the court system and specifically in the area of juveniles and how that has been just a passion of yours for so many years. So where were we born, brothers and sisters and all of those things that people like to know?
Well, maybe that's where all of this came from, as far as my being so interested in juvenile court, juveniles, young people, teenagers. Yes, I love these teenage boys, no matter how bad they are, because I think they have a lot to offer too. And also maybe that's because I only had one sister, and I have one sister. I was born in Nashville, and my maiden name is Crockett. My father's name was David Crockett, and his father's name was David Crockett. And so all my childhood growing up, I had the distinction, whether it was good or bad, of being, of him being an ancestor, the real David Crockett being an ancestor. Finally, I was able to look into my genealogy and discover that I'm not a direct descendant of David Crockett, but of his uncle, Colonel Anthony Crockett. So I am a cousin. My kids, they take that just as well. They still consider themselves part of the Alamo. And I have had people even tell me that probably my father, he was a sort of a maverick kind of person himself, and that they would not be surprised if he and his father and grandfather had not been some of the very favorite cousins of David Crockett, because my sons all loved wearing coonskin caps when they were little, because they really cabbaged on that name, you know. So at any rate, that's we came up in Nashville, and I married my husband, who was from Hardin County, Tennessee, when I was quite young, and he had just come out of the Navy and from World War II, and we settled in Nashville, and we do have 12 children. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1992. It's hard to believe it's been 21 years. Only one of our children was born in Williamson County, and that's our youngest son. But when we came here in 1973, it was to develop some property at Lewisburg Pike, and my husband was a builder and developer, and we bought the farm there and developed Red Wing subdivision, and most of our children settled there as they grew up, because our 4 boys all were, or at least 3 of the 4 followed their father in the building business, and my youngest one did some other things first, but came back and has also become a very fine home builder, as they all have. About 7 or 8, I think, I have 8 daughters. At least 6 of those, my wonderful sons-in-law, also got into the real estate and development business. So it's been a family business that we've all had, since we've been in Franklin, certainly. So that's kind of the background that we had. I attended Peabody College.
Now, back then, it would have been women's. Was it Peabody?
Peabody. It was George Peabody College for teachers.
For teachers.
Yes, and I got my undergraduate degree in elementary education. Taught for a half a year, and but at the same time that I finished my senior year, I also did my freshman year at the YMCA Night Law School, which is now Nashville School of Law.
Wow.
So that was a 3-year course. So in 1970, I graduated from the Nashville School of Law, and in early 71, began private practice in Nashville, and practiced there for 6 years until my appointment to the bench here in Williamson County in 1977. I believe it was July. So that's where the judicial career came in.
Well, and as I sit here and see the passion in your conversation and kind of the pioneer spirit that you indicated your father and probably your brothers, it's as the old country expression, the acorn didn't fall too far from the tree in your spirit. And coming here to Williamson County, and in those days, because you're in an area that Williamson County was not developed back in the 70s. It was still a very small, rural, certainly agricultural community. And for you to give your directions, and you and your husband start your family, but you could see there was still a passion for young people.
Well, and of course that was really sort of the beginning of our family, because as the grandchildren began to come along, we had by that time already arrived in Franklin. And as a matter of fact, a really kind of funny thing, when my husband and my brother-in-law and I think one of our children, when we first came out to look at the property that became Red Wing, it's on Lewisburg Pike, and drove on out, I remember my brother-in-law, John Frank, saying, well, you would never want to buy this property because there are 2 names of 2 roads out here that no one would ever want to live on. One's called Henpeck and the other Goose Creek. He says, that just would not be good at all for real estate sales.
Well, I got to agree with the Henpeck. I've always thought that's an unusual name. Somebody needs to do a study of how that road got that way.
Yeah, we really need to know about that. But all these little folks then came along, and grandchildren, and they're now about 35 grandchildren and 26 great-grandchildren. And of course the grands are getting married, and all these little young babies are coming along. So our family really numbers about 105 to 110.
And that could change before we get off the air.
Oh, it does, because some of them get engaged, and we don't really know whether we count those yet or not. Even once the date's set, sometimes we go ahead and add those into the mix, and unfortunately, a few things, a few
along the way
go the other way. So, but all in all, I have a great family, and I'm very, very, very proud of them. And I just want them to be, good cornerstones in this community and do the right thing and give back to the county and become people of vision, and also, but never forget their roots, and always be willing to help others.
When you think back in those days, early days, that you were beginning your career as an attorney, and the need, again, our population was we're about 190,000 people now. Probably population back in those days might have been
37,000 when I took the bench.
But you apparently saw the need for, and we'll call it in today's vernacular so that people understand it, a juvenile court. We didn't have one back then.
No, not at all.
And oftentimes you handled most of those early cases with our juveniles. And it's interesting, even in the attitude that you have today, there's good in all of those young men and women out there. It's just
absolutely.
Having to channel that energy, and being of the male gender, it seems like, not always, that young men have a tendency to get off target sometimes, but oftentimes through mothers and dads, and certainly the judicial system, you can correct some of those bad habits and get them in the mainstream once again to be a productive individual in our community. Tough times back then, dealing with juveniles, I suspect.
We had very few resources, and when children were brought into the court to me, and to Betsy Adjutant and Charlie Ray Smith, the three of us were the juvenile court for a number of years. And when children would come in, we three would scratch our heads and think, okay, now what can we do? Well, as we know now, and we've known for many years and should have known way before, most of the problems that the children have are not just the problem that brings them before the court. They're underlying causes. Many times they're family crises. They are issues that need resolving in other ways as well. And you can take a child who's acting up and acting in a disruptive or disrespectful or what we would consider a really bad manner, and recognize that there is something underlying that's caused that child to be that way, and that were we in that same circumstance, we'd probably be that bad or worse. So we first had to try to develop some way of getting the public involved. And one of the first things that we were able to do was to get together a volunteer group of people who also were interested in the welfare of children, and we began to start My Friend's House, which was originally called Williamson County Youth Inc., I believe. And we had a lot of people in the community who were willing to give some time and effort to helping us build a nucleus of folks that could come together and talk about it and think of things, write some grants, do some things, help us to, and eventually we were able to get a house and have a place for children who really were in dire need of somewhere to be placed while some other family situation was being identified. Later, we were able to get the CASA involved, the Court-Appointed Special Advocates, which had been a group that already had been organized, but we didn't really know much about it. So Betsy, and by the way, we're going to be talking to the board of CASA on Wednesday night to try to help them understand how they got where they are today and where it came from.
And the history is very
important. And the history of CASA, which is another subject. And unfortunately, the older I have gotten, my memory has faded so on this that I have to say, okay, Betsy, who did this and what year was that? Because it wasn't about me. It was about the people who were around me and were willing to step up and do the work and get in the trenches. And we now, just seems like as time went on, and then the legislature intervened and determined, after some court cases where non-lawyer judges had been incarcerating children for various acts. Once that became a law that only a lawyer judge could do that, then I was able to get the jurisdiction over juvenile court, and we were able to have many more opportunities to use probation and to access things from the state and as well as the county.
When you look back, Judge, in that period of time from, we'll just say, late 70s, early 80s, for about 20 to 25 years, and I realize this is in another 15 years.
Another
past.
20.
Yes. So many things have changed. I mean, I would think, and I am not a judge, and I'm certainly not an attorney either, but the thinking from the legal side and the way we deal with our juveniles today, it was interesting. I remember you saying not only this morning, but one other time, that it's gratifying to see that we now have our own juvenile court judge. Can you kind of give a distinction of, not necessarily yourself, because I think you were recognized as one of those pioneer judges that dealt with our juveniles in a very professional, but recognized they had underlying issues, recognized they were not mature, they were not oftentimes criminals, and therefore we have to treat those young minds a little bit different. But the mindset of a circuit court judge or any judge in the juvenile oftentimes is not what it is today, way back 30, 40 years ago.
Well, of course, I had General Sessions jurisdiction. And so they do overlap to some degree because you're dealing with families in minor situations. Of course, to everyone, I keep saying I don't like using the word, these are minor offenses. To the person who's involved, it's one of the biggest things in their life.
Yes.
And that's been one of my, I guess one of my pet peeves is that to make certain that the respect and all is given to every person that comes into that General Sessions Court, and that we treat them in such a way that they can go out from there and feel like not only has their legal problem been resolved, but that also if there are underlying issues and needs and things that we could send them to separate places and help them work problems out at home where they can have healthy families. So I enjoyed working with General Sessions as well. The overlap between General Sessions and juvenile is that many of the children who came before the juvenile court, their parents would be frequently involved in the General Sessions situation, whether it would be some small accident, some non-payment of rent, some fights, DUIs, drug use. In the civil division, it might be automobile accidents, it might be debts that were trying to be collected, might be rent, and all of these things kind of have a correlation, because when people are in trouble, then it really does wipe off on their children. You can't do anything about that. The kids react very strongly to what's going on in the home. And some of their behaviors, we found out, and would always find out, some of these behaviors were directly related to and correlate with the problems that are happening in the home.
I've got to ask, and I know it's not the side of the world that you like to go in because you're a very humble person, but how did an individual, a person of you that had that you were a loving wife, a supportive role model as a mother to a dozen children, a individual that had a full-time job, how did you blend all of those hats that you had to wear? And in today's world, I have children, and I certainly admire the women and that are able to blend the role as a mother and as a employee or employer, because you really were. The checks may have been written at a different area, but you were a boss over. We'll put that. How did you blend those early days? Because the creatures, the habits, the things that we have today, we didn't have 25 and 30 years ago. A lot of the modern appliances. I suspect that in your early days, you were like the air conditioning we had might have been a whole house fan with a cracking of the windows. I won't get into all of that, but I suspect your early days was a very productive, but it was still it was a different time than we have today.
It was a different time.
How did Judge Jane, how did the mother, how did the wife of a man that was in the building, how did you balance all of that?
I don't know. That's, to be honest, I don't know. I just know that if you get up in the morning and you have a lot of dreams, I did a lot when I was a young child and up 10, 11, 12 years old. I really remember my dad always told me that I could do anything I wanted to do. And I remember I would sit in a tree limb in the afternoon dreaming about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And it was always came back to the same thing. I wanted to have a dozen children. I wanted to be like Nancy Drew's father and be a criminal lawyer. And then I would think of something else. I wanted to be a great singer. and I did sing in church and all, and just would dream all these different things that I thought I wanted to become. You know, there were probably times I even wrote off to movie stars. All of these things that all little girls dream about, and I don't know. I guess I was just goofy enough to think that maybe some of that kind of stuff really can come true. And when I met my husband, who was the youngest of 12 children, so he was obviously all for a big family. So, you know, that was the easy part. The hard part was reaching the point where I recognized that I could not do the best for my children if I did not have a decent education. And I had quit school in the 12th grade to get married. And so that bothered me, and it bothered me for a number of years, from the time I was 16 when I married until I was 30. I was busy raising all those children, and I had 8 by that time. And one day Lisa, my oldest daughter, came home from school and asked me, they went to Woodmont School, which was a good community school, close to where we lived, within walking distance, which was another reason things worked fairly well, you know, with a big family. We lived close to the school, and they didn't have all the stresses. They came home and played in the backyard and all. Asked me that one day where I went to college. She'd been talking to her friends. Where'd you go to college? And I was so embarrassed to have to tell her that I had not been to college. I could not bear to tell her I didn't even have a high school diploma. So the next day, our matchbook was lying on the table, and I happened to open this matchbook up, and on the back was an advertisement for the American School of Correspondence. It says, are you tired of being ignorant? Well, yeah. So I was going to write off and see what I could do about finishing high school, but I happened to make a phone call to an educator at Hume Fogg, where I had taken an English class one summer, to tell him that I needed my transcript from a class I'd had there and from my other schools. And he said, oh, you don't need to spend money doing that. You go over to Vanderbilt and you take the GED, and then you start to college. And that's what I did.
Amazing.
I took my 8 children and went over to Peabody and walked in the door and kept all of them sitting outside, and went in to see Dean Jones and told him that I had no credentials, had never taken the ACT, never taken the SAT, but I wanted to start to college. And he told me that I was just crazy enough and he was going to let me start. So that's the way. Through that all, it was wonderful because I had a lot of help with my husband and my children. And of course, you know that having 12, you don't have them all 12 at the same time. So by the time these little ones were coming along, and you know some of my older children, you can ask Lisa and Brenda and Mary how much work they had to do. Now these boys, I don't know what they did. And some of my little baby girls, the ones who are only 40s, you know, they were
now
probably...
be real careful. You've got to go home after this
I've got
show.
to go home, and they're all wonderful, wonderful.
Well, because we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. The time just goes so fast.
Oh, it does, yes.
But I know that deep inside your heart, there's still this huge passion.
Yes, and that's why I'm still working. I work occasionally. I help Sharon out with some cases, and I also work in the clerk's office because I want to give back to the people who worked with me and who helped to make our court good. As long as I live, I want to be able to be part of the juvenile justice system. And I just can't get that, just never goes out of my heart, because I truly believe that the key to our survival is not only a county or a state or a country, but as people, as the earth. It all boils down to how we treat the most vulnerable, and that's our youth. We have to be there, and we have to make sure that they have a safe, warm, comfortable environment. We can never rest as long as one person in this county is sick or hungry or cold, or their child has no way to get to school. And I think all of us just need to work on just get on the bandwagon and make sure that we do everything we can do to promote family values, to promote healthy children and educational opportunities for everybody, and then that we take care of our young people and that we love them. Because these big old boys and girls, when they're teenagers, they are extremely lovable. They just don't know whether they're fishing or cutting bait.
Great term. Today, you will motivate people that watch this show. There'll be someone there one more time that you'll prick the heart, or you'll give encouragement to, as you did so many times from the bench. So many times in our community, I know you've helped candidates, you've run. We'll continue to see that. Your involvement is just so noteworthy. If I had to pick a word, what message do you send to these parents that are just struggling with their children, that I don't know that I'll ever get them to see? What can you tell that mother or that daddy, but oftentimes that mother crying and on her knees, please change some course of action here? How do you answer that person?
Keep praying. Keep praying and keep the faith, and never let the child believe that you don't have faith in them. And maybe stop even thinking that everything's going to be bad, and always believe that the sun comes up tomorrow.
Great.
And it will.
Great advice. Got 1 minute. What have I overlooked that you want to tell everybody?
Well, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, maybe someday.
Because you're doing a great job.
This isn't about me. This is about you this morning. And what an inspiration. What an inspiration.
You are very kind. And I know that I really don't do this very well, because I could talk forever and ever and ever about juvenile court, juvenile justice, the things I would like to see happen, the things that have happened, how far we've come, and all of those things that we can't, of course, do. But generally speaking, I'm so thankful that we have our own juvenile court, and I'm very thankful to Sharon, who is going to be and already has been a marvelous juvenile court judge. She has empathy, sympathy, compassion, intelligence. She has all the right ingredients for us to have a very fine juvenile court. But there is one thing that we do need. We need our own juvenile court, standalone operation.
I think she just got a word in on the budget side.
Budget?
Judge Jane Franks.
I hope to live that long to see that.
Judge Jane Franks been our guest today. What a wonderful person, a lady that we have all learned to enjoy and love here in Williamson County. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Have a good day. I'm Rogers Anderson. We'll see you around a little bit later.